SSC capitalized.
This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation every week on religion and American life. In addition to the conversation, we have the news. I have 4 news stories today, plus a little personal word about John Prine. I have a commentary about a trip I just took with my grandson. We went up to Greensboro, North Carolina, to the famous Woolworth store, where the student sit-in started in 1961. I was 11 years old. I took my 12-year-old grandson with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I have a video that we're going to play of a wonderful John Prine song, You've Got Some Gold in You. And then my guest today, Dr. Annie Snow from Eugene, Oregon, where she is now, but I first met her when she was a student at Georgetown College in the bluegrass state of Kentucky. She's a professional therapist, specializes in mental health, especially with those who are in the LGBTQ community. Welcome to the Meetinghouse, Annie. Dr. Snow.
Thank you for having me.
Just completed your PhD, and I'm so interested in your journey, how you got from a freshman thinking about English to in Kentucky to what you're doing now. And then, of course, this is Gay Pride Month, and we're going to talk all about the mental health of the LGBTQ community, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot. We're glad to have you, Dr. Snow. I'll be back with her in just a minute, but I'm going to start, as I always do, with the news. I've got 4 news stories today. I begin out in Los Angeles, where we go frequently for the news in religion and American life. Pastor Rick Warren has announced his retirement. He set in motion a process to find his replacement at the famous Saddleback Community Church. Warren launched that church in 1980. He and his wife built it into a multi-campus ministry with 53,000 members. Amazing. His 2 books, The Purpose-Driven Life and The Purpose-Driven Church, sold millions and millions of copies around the world, generated a great deal of income. Warren has stayed away from politics, but nevertheless has been one of the most influential Baptist evangelical pastors in the English-speaking world. We reported on him either last week or the week before because for the first time his church ordained 3 women as pastors of their church, created quite a stir across the evangelical world. A very different story from Canton, Ohio. Normally we associate Canton with the Hall of Fame, but in this case, a Jewish athlete was forced to eat a pepperoni pizza as punishment for missing a team weightlifting session. Pepperoni, you know, is a form of pork. It's anathema to adherents of the Jewish faith. This fact was known to the school and the coaches. When they found out about it, the school dismissed the head coach, Marcus Watley, shown here on the picture, and all 7 coaches associated with that football team at McKinley High School. A sad story in being insensitive to people's religious traditions. The student, I understand, was told to sit in the middle of the gym and eat the entire pizza in front of all the other players. This is wrong on multiple levels. The father of that student has vowed to file a civil lawsuit. From Madison, Wisconsin, a follow-up to a story that we shared a couple of weeks ago. Father James Altman is a priest of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Western Wisconsin. His bishop directed him to resign from his position as pastor of the St. James the Less Parish because of his outspoken comments on politics and the pandemic. Quote, "You cannot be Catholic and be a Democrat," end quote, he famously said. He's posted many YouTubes against the vaccination and against the president. Father Altman has refused to obey his bishop. That creates another problem. His supporters throughout the conservative Catholic community in the United States have raised, get this, more than $630,000 for his defense. Of course, this will not be adjudicated in a civil court, but in the courts of the Roman Catholic Church. His bishop, William Callahan, has initiated procedures to remove him, but that will take a long time working through according to the rules of the Roman Catholic Church. Near Bentonville, Arkansas, up in the northwest corner of that state, near the headquarters of the Walmart Corporation, I might add, in a small community, 6 persons stand accused of robbing a small home Buddhist temple serving the Vietnamese community in that region. The 6 are natives of Romania. They may be involved in a string of robberies in similar temples in California, Arizona, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. Their tactics are the same in all of these places. A woman enters a small temple asking for prayer, and others in the group canvass the rooms around the temple looking for cash and other valuables. That's all the news I have today, sponsored, of course, by Perfecto Coffee Inc. of California. Order some coffee, perfectocoffeeinc.com. I'm Dwight A. Moody in the Meetinghouse. I'll be back in just a minute with my guest, Dr. Annie Snow, and our conversation about the mental health in the LGBTQ community. But first, maybe this is news. This weekend, I'm celebrating my 1-year anniversary with John Prine. He died, many of you know, on April the 7th, 2020, but I had never heard of John Prine until June the 12th. Watched a video and I got converted on the spot to apply my religious language. So here is John Prine at Austin City Limits a few years ago singing, this is a great song, You've Got Some Gold Inside of You.
Now here's John Prine.
Is there ever enough space between us to keep us both honest and true? Why is it so hard just to sit in the yard and stare at the sky so blue? I got a new way of walking and a new way of talking, honey, when I'm around you. But it gives me the blues when I got some good news and you're not there to bring it to. Life is a blessing, it's a delicatessen of all the little favors you do. wrapped up together, no matter the weather, baby, I always come through. Well, it's a measure of treasure that gives me the pleasure of loving you the way I do. And you know I would gladly say I need your love badly and bring these little things to you. 'Cause you got gold, gold inside of you. You got gold, gold inside of you. Well, I got some gold inside me too. I'm thinking I'm knowing that I gotta be going. You know I hate to say so long. It gives me an ocean of mixed up emotion. I'll have to work it out in a song. Well, I'm leaving a lot for the little I got, but you know a lot of little will do. And if you give me your love, I'll let it shine up above and light my way back home to you. 'Cause you got gold, gold inside of you. You got gold, gold inside of you. Well, I got some gold inside me too. You got wheels turning inside of you. You got wheels turning inside of you. Well, I got wheels turning inside me too.
John Prine, Austin City Limits. Dr. Annie Snow is my guest today, coming from Eugene, Oregon. Annie, are you a John Prine fan? Do you even know who John Prine is?
I adore John Prine.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
I remember the first time I heard Angel from Montgomery. It was
Sure.
transformative.
Yes, that's the way I felt when I first heard his music on June the 12th of 2020. I was just stunned and have been a convert ever since. I don't guess there's a day gone by that I haven't listened to his music, to the consternation of everybody in my family. You know, they're so sick and tired of John Prine by now. So that's great. Well, it's great to see you, Dr. Snow. I want to ask you about your journey. You came to Georgetown College, where I was teaching, and we got to know one another. We served together in the chapel. You were graduated 05 in English. You went to the Patterson School of Diplomacy at the university and got a degree there, and then worked your way into social work And here you are out in Eugene, Oregon with your own practice, Snow Counseling Alternatives. How did this happen? Tell us about this journey.
Oh, geez, yeah, the long and winding road. I'll try not to be too long-winded. So yeah, I started at Georgetown in 2001. I had just turned 17.
Yes, I remember.
I was a baby. Not something I necessarily recommend. I was so young. Yeah, so I had the opportunity to study at Oxford,
Oxford?
as well, because Georgetown has that fantastic partnership with Regent's Park College. And so, yeah,
You
so
went to you went to Oxford. What did you study at Oxford?
I studied English, and I also studied international relations there as well. So yeah, did a few tutorials at Queen's College, a few tutorials at Regent's Park. It was just a fantastic experience. I fell in love with this city, and I returned later in graduate school to intern for Oxium International. So that was kind of my plan at the time during graduate school, was to work for an NGO. And I was really young and plans changed. And I ended up moving to Northern Ireland, got married, lived there for a while. And it was actually quite a traumatic experience living in Northern Ireland and Belfast for me.
So tell me, why Northern Ireland? You got married. Was he from Ireland? Your husband?
Yeah, my first husband was actually from lived in Northumberland, grew up in Northumberland, but we moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland. And as someone who was loved traveling, I was surprised by what a transition that was to live in Belfast, and just had a really hard time coping in a new city, being newly married, and found myself getting really incredibly depressed. And I lost my earbud, but the other one's in. So I got really, really depressed and really just in a bad state. Had to come back to the States to get some help. And that was kind of the catalyst for my journey into social work for the very first time. So.
Excuse me. I want to come back to your journey, but do you know the connection between Oxford and Belfast?
I don't think I do.
What famous person lived the first part of his life in Belfast and the rest of his life in Oxford? The great C.S. Lewis.
Oh, right, of course,
yes,
yeah.
Was at Magdalen College where he taught, and the kilns out there. I've always wanted to go to Belfast. I hope I don't have the same kind of reaction to Belfast that you did. Traumatized by all that you encountered. You came back to the United States, got into social work to try to heal yourself and maybe heal some other people too.
Yeah. I went through AmeriCorps and worked for Catholic Charities for quite some time there in Lexington.
In the AmeriCorps?
Yeah.
Wow. I have a very good friend who runs AmeriCorps, Joe Bringardner now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A very good friend who's in charge of the AmeriCorps program in the state of Kentucky. What kind of work did you do with AmeriCorps?
So I worked with Catholic Charities to develop a few programs, like a financial literacy program, and then ended up doing a lot of work helping folks stay in their homes, so a lot of emergency relief.
Sure. And so tell us how you got pulled into social work at the university.
So after working for Catholic Charities for quite a few years, I kind of wanted just to continue my education into social work. And that's when I met with a program director. Wasn't sure if I would get accepted because I didn't have an MSW, but they took a chance on me, and I started the doctoral program.
That's great.
2013. Yeah.
Did you have Dr. Jones for any courses?
I did not. Not.
Blake Jones is also a good friend of mine who is involved with the social work program there. So now all of this, you started in Kentucky, you went to the British Isles, Oxford, and up to Belfast, came back to Kentucky. So how did you get out to Oregon?
That's a great question. So I got married in 2015 to Matthew Stowe, who's also a graduate of Georgetown. And we had kind of always toyed around with the idea of living in the Pacific Northwest. It was a region of the country that appealed to both of us. I was at a part in my doctoral studies where I was just starting to dissertate. I finished all my coursework, and an opportunity arose to move out to Oregon, and we kind of jumped at the chance. And we've been here ever since. So yeah, 6 years now, which is
6
incredible
years.
to me. Yeah.
I have been to Eugene, Oregon. I actually have a good friend who lives out there who's the pastor of a church. She is Jenny Elliott, pastor of the Friendly Street Church of God. You may
That's
have
such a great name.
Isn't it
Such a
though?
great name. Yeah.
She just announced she's been the associate pastor for a number of years, and she was part of the Academy of Preachers, which is an organization that I ran for about 10 years, and from Indiana. But she's just been elevated to the senior status there at that church, Friendly Street Church of God. Isn't that a great? Makes you want to go to church there, doesn't
it? For sure.
So you've started your counseling, Snow Counseling Alternatives. This is an interesting title for a business. Tell us about it and what it means to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm sure you're referring to the alternatives part
Yes,
of that. So,
alternative to what,
exactly. Yeah, so alternative to the medical model
I see.
of treatment. Yeah, so historically, when we think about how LGBTQ folks have been treated, certainly by society at large, but also by the mental health community, it's been quite abysmal. So homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual up until 1973.
Yeah.
And arguably, a lot of the diagnoses that are in the latest iteration of the DSM continue to pathologize LGBTQ identities. So understandably, a lot of LGBTQ folks don't feel particularly safe or seen or affirmed in traditional mental health spaces. So I wanted to offer an alternative to those spaces and offer affirming care that doesn't pathologize people's identities and looks at more sociological issues that folks may be dealing with.
And so what pulled you into this stream of therapy work?
Yeah, it seems like we made quite a leap there. So as a part of my doctoral journey, I was introduced to Julie Searle, who was the past president of the American Association of Suicidology. So doing a lot of great work out there at UK. And I asked her to be my mentor and found myself doing a lot of research into suicide, particularly in LGBTQ populations. And it's kind of interesting how I guess this all comes about. It wasn't really my plan when I started the doctoral program, but looking back on my own life and my own lived experience, I can start to connect the dots, right? So my own experience with suicide, my first experience with suicide, I was pretty young, 11, 12 years old. And I was at a time when I was coming to terms with my own sexuality, living in the Bible Belt, being homeschooled, a part of a very evangelical community where I didn't think that was okay. And I remember perusing my dad's library. This is back in the day when I really didn't really have the kind of internet access. I couldn't go on and Google, but I remember going to my dad's library. He had an extensive library, and going on index and looking up homosexuality and what it said about folks who are gay or lesbian, queer, bisexual. And many of the books that I came across suggested that I was doomed, I was going to hell, there's something very wrong with me. And I found myself incredibly suicidal after getting that information. So now when I look back, I can kind of connect the dots. Well, of course, some of those early formative experiences probably had a lot to do with why I found myself studying LGBTQ suicidology as someone in their late 20s. So that's kind of how that journey happened. And in studying LGBTQ suicidology, of course, you start studying mental health and mental health treatment of folks who are trans or gay or queer identified in some way. So that's kind of how that all came to be.
So I do want to get to the wider issue of suicide in the LGBTQ community, but I want to ask you, now that you've brought this up, have your parents stayed with you on your journey through all of these things? Comment on that.
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's been a journey that I've done often on my own, and with folks that I consider chosen family. And I think that looks different for different people, right? How they navigate that experience. For some folks, it's one in which they bring their parents along, and that's a really healing thing for them to do. And for others, it's easier for them, or makes more sense to take that journey with their chosen family, or just on their own.
Did this family church culture dynamic have a role in you moving from Kentucky to Oregon? That's a long way from home.
Oh, I don't know if it consciously played a role. I think culturally, this region of the country makes more sense to me.
That's what I was getting at. I was one who moved way away from home. My folks were down in West Kentucky, and I moved to Pittsburgh. And my dad said to me, "Why in the world would anybody want to live in Pittsburgh?" It's a great city. So I know about moving away from family and home and into a really, really different cultural region.
Yes.
It can be invigorating. Well, it was for us, and it has been for you, I assume.
Absolutely.
Being out on the West Coast. I remember clearly my first trip to Portland, Oregon. I visited Lewis and Clark College.
Oh, yeah.
And met a man by the name of Tom Krottenmacher, who was their PR director. He is the religion writer, was then, is now, for the USA Today newspaper. And but I have such wonderful memories of my first visit to that part of the country. It is a great part. So you got the LGBTQ. So talk to us about suicide in general, how you encountered this, and how you were drawn to it. You've told us a little bit about your own suicidal thoughts early in life, and then in your graduate work. Talk to us about it in relationship to your work as a therapist.
Sure. So one of the first studies that I did was comparing the experiences of LGBT youth with their heterosexual counterparts and their experiences with suicide, which is really interesting to me. So one of the reasons why I was really interested in this population to begin with is because we know that the prevalence of suicide attempts is higher for LGBTQ folks. So when we think about like LGBT, and I'm specifying LGBT because in the research community, we look at sexual orientation apart from gender identity as obviously two different phenomenon. But yeah, LGBT youth attempt suicide 5 times the rate of non-LGBT folks. So that's one of the reasons why I was really drawn to try to figure out why that was. And one of the earliest studies fascinated me and astounded me when I was looking at precipitants to suicide and depression, and the logistic regression analysis that I did looking at secondary data. Depression was a precipitant for suicide for non-LGBT folks, but wasn't for LGBT identified folks. Instead, Instead it was familial support, or the lack of familial support was a predictor of suicide. And so that kind of started me on my journey of looking beyond a medical model for answers, and looking more at some of these environmental factors that are correlates of suicide for those in the LGBTQ community. So, and I found my way looking more into trans and gender diverse folks and their experiences with suicide. We're looking at even higher prevalence there, around 41%. About 50% attempt suicide at some point in their life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, of course, as a minister myself, and as a person like you, raised in a very religious culture, I'm just both interested and troubled by the relationship between religious culture and suicide, especially in the LGBTQ community. So comment on that. Have you done any studies on this, the role of religion in precipitating suicide, or the role in religion in ministering or responding to suicide?
I think that's a fantastic question.
Mm-hmm.
I've not done any research into that. There have been studies conducted. This is, especially when we look at trans and gender diverse experiences, this is a relatively new area of research.
Sure.
And suicide. So a lot of those studies are still nascent. We do know that folks who come from unaffirming families, whatever that looks like, right? If
Religious or non-religious, either
non-religious, unaffirming, that, again, looking at LGBT youth, 8.5 times more likely to attempt suicide if you have family who are not accepting of
Sure.
who you are.
Sure.
So that's, of course, troubling. And I think, and obviously there's some backgrounds and some churches, some cultures in which being LGBTQ is seen as a sin still,
Right.
and parents are not accepting of their children for those reasons. And I think it's important to understand what that looks like, what the consequences, often unintended, are of that lack of acceptance.
Well, interestingly enough, this may be kind of an aside. I grew up as a Southern Baptist, and next week, the Southern Baptists are gathering for their annual meeting in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've had 2 long conversations this week with 2 high-profile leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention talking to me off the record, and they both of them said to me, while the sexual orientation, transgender issue is at the center of all the trouble that the crisis that's facing the Southern Baptist Convention. But they said this: what's happening is that the parents and pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention, I think this would be true elsewhere, what they're fighting against is their own children. That their children and that generation simply does not hold the same kind of attitude, as I'm sure you find this as well. And this tension between the older Southern Baptist leaders and their own children is perhaps the unspoken, unarticulated crisis facing that religious network. And while there's going to be a lot of ugly rhetoric in their meeting next week in Nashville, underneath it, in their churches and in their homes, the people are not supporting these public stances being taken by this the largest Protestant network in our country. And Annie, I actually took that as a hopeful sign, don't you? That there's a whole generation here that is not afraid of it.
I want to have hope. I think it's hard to be in this field if you don't have a little bit of hope that things can change and things can be better and look different. And at the same time, recognizing this year alone, 2001, has been really devastating when we look at the number of bills that have been introduced in over 30 states, anti-trans legislation. And again, as a suicidologist, somebody who looks at the ramifications of that, that's a little troubling. So I like to have hope that that won't be the case in years to come.
Now, you've used this word several times that I don't guess that I'd ever heard, suicidologist.
Right.
That's a pretty specialized niche, even in the mental health community. Do you advertise yourself in this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of depends, right? Like suicidologist is just a fancy term that we use for somebody who researches and studies suicide. So that's kind of one hat that I wear. I continue to do research. And I also meet with folks in a counselor capacity. And I don't necessarily refer to myself as a suicidologist when I'm working with my counseling clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some folks I work with are experiencing suicidal thoughts or in suicidal crisis, but I don't use them to research, right? Like that, those worlds are kept very separate.
As a parent, I've had experience with responding to suicide attempts.
Yeah.
And of course, as a pastor, we are taught always to take suicidal comments very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about what any person should do if a friend or acquaintance, a mother, a father, a brother or sister starts talking about this.
I appreciate that question a lot. I think the first thing to do is to kind of manage or check in with yourself about your own reaction to that, right? I think understandably, if someone close to us discloses that they're considering suicide or that's a thought that they've had, the natural tendency is to maybe panic. And when we're panicked, we often respond in ways that might be less than helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? We try to offer advice like, oh, but you have so much to live for. Look at X, Y, and Z, or
right.
Don't do
right.
that. That will hurt your parents. That's selfish.
Yeah,
we try
exactly.
to act out of panic.
I really think this is a very common instinct on the part of people who love others.
Yes.
Yeah. So instead of that, what we should do?
Right.
Coaches here.
I think to check it, because again, to recognize that's a very normal response is to feel panicked, right? And to check in and say, okay, I'm feeling a little panicked. Take a breath and honestly just ask them, hey, what's going on? I'm here for you. I love you. I just want to hear from you about like what's going on in your life. And there's no need to offer advice. There's no need to feel like you have to come in and rescue somebody or save them. In that moment, the best thing to do is just to listen to them and to validate how they're feeling.
Boy, I think this is the most important thing that you could possibly say. And of course, listening to people is a great strategy in any and every situation. Am I not right about this?
100%.
Whether it's in a classroom or in a prayer circle or in a therapy room, just listening to people. I once was interviewed by a woman who has a national show about apologetics, you know, this thing about defending the faith. And she asked me, I said, what do you, she said, Dr. Moody, what do you think is the most important thing we can do as Christians, as an apologist? I said, well, the most important thing we can do is listen to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rather than try to give them answers and tell them what to do. It's to listen to people, what's in their heart and on their mind and their soul. It is the answer. I mean, it's a great strategy in every situation.
Yeah. And again, I think the temptation is often in those moments to think that you know what's best for someone. And so some folks can be tempted to introduce an intervention or do something that may not be what that person actually wants. So asking them, hey, what would be helpful for you right now? And making some suggestions is fine. Like, can I cook you a meal? Can I clean your house? Can I watch your kids for a little bit? What would be helpful to you? But if your friend tells you, hey, I'm thinking, oh, I better call the cops. I better call 911. This is an emergency. This is a crisis. That may not be what they want you to do in that moment.
What can I do for you? That's really a great question. What are the signs that should push us to a more urgent response? When should we call 911 or somebody like you?
Yeah, that's again the best way to know is to ask the person, right? There, as in the suicidology community, there's been quite a lot of research going into how can we distinguish between the folks who are at high risk and folks who are at low risk.
Right.
And we still don't have any good tools for that, to be quite honest. So if the quote unquote experts don't really know, I don't know how we can expect lay folks to know, like, hey, what are the signs that somebody is an imminent danger, right? I think the best and most humane response is, again, to ask somebody, what do you want? There are some good tools. I really prefer the WRAP app, which is a free app that people can download on their phone, just WRAP, WRAP. And it's a way that if folks have been experiencing issues, if they've experienced suicide in the past, or they can create a plan that works for them. And in this plan, they can talk about, hey, if I'm in crisis, this is what I want to happen. This is what I don't want to happen. And they can share that plan with folks who are close to them. So even suggesting to a friend, hey, there's this app, if you wanted to put a plan together, if you want to include me, that's great. If not, I understand. Maybe you'd find that helpful. And that's a good way to know if somebody's in crisis. These are the things that they want to have happen, and these are the things that they don't want to have happen. So, So
this word WRAP has me curious now. Is this an acronym, or is there some significance to the word WRAP?
It certainly is. We love acronyms in this field, and I honestly, off the top of my head, don't even remember what WRAP stands for at this point. But if you go to the App Store, it's pretty easy to find. I think it's like a wellness. I think the W stands for wellness, but it's a great tool that I recommend. And I think because it's not a one size fits all when it comes to working with folks who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts or suicidal behaviors, right? And it's important, I think, to respect their autonomy in all things.
There is a difference on some level in working with a straight suicidal person and an LGBTQ suicidal person. I want to ask you about, do you ever hesitate? Do you ever worry about other professionals in the 911 world or in the medical world being inhospitable to LGBTQ cries for help?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Some of my latest research has been looking at how LGBTQ folks are treated within mental health spaces. And even folks who are well-intentioned, who advertise their services as affirming, aren't necessarily equipped or have the knowledge that they need in order to work effectively with LGBTQ folks. So yes, it is certainly a concern of mine. And one of the things I really enjoy doing, especially as often my practice is full, is helping folks identify providers who truly are affirming and safe, because there's so much more damage that can be done if you go to ostensibly an affirming provider or just a mental health provider in general, and you leave feeling even worse and invalidated about who you are. So that is a concern that I have.
Yes, as a minister, I feel this acutely, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that many ministers don't have the kind of compassion that they need to have for the LGBTQ in any mental health situation or any life situation, period, let alone bordering on suicide. And which is why I asked that. So do you teach seminars, or is most of your work, here you are broadcasting to all 36 or 37 of our listeners today. But do you travel? Do you speak? Do you do seminars out there in Eugene, Oregon?
Yeah, so I've done some seminars for some churches, actually, funnily enough, about how they can be more affirming. And I really enjoy that work, of course, because of COVID. That's been a bit stymied, but yes, that's something I really enjoy doing.
Boy, that's a great calling. Just that piece of the professional landscape to help churches know, because there are many church people, many religious people who want to move out of the more judgmental environment in which we all were raised, and sometimes don't really know how to do that. And the same thing with the whole race issue. We don't want to be racist, but we need some really good coaching on how to be a non-racist white person. And I think that kind of ministry to churches is great. What kind of response do you get from ordinary church people out there in Oregon?
Well, I feel like often I'm in some ways preaching to the choir in this sense, talking to individuals who are already sold on the idea of being better allies, being affirming. I've not encountered too many folks who are resistant, so I've been sheltered, I guess, in that way, right? I haven't been speaking in very many hostile environments.
But still, even in an accepting environment, as I said, you've got people who want to be different than they've been in the past and don't have the tools, or they don't know about the RAP app.
Sure.
They don't know about your counseling ministry, and it gives them the tools to move in the direction that they want to move.
Yes, I like to think so, for sure.
Yeah. God's blessing on your work, Dr. Snow.
Thank you, Dr. Moody. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
I am so thrilled to talk to you and to find out more about your ministry and your work. And I hope to have you back in the Meetinghouse sometime. May your practice snowcounselingalternatives.com, I guess, is your website, and maybe the program today will generate a call or two for you. God's blessings, and may God prosper your work. You are on the front lines of one of the great struggles of our modern world, and I commend you for it, and pray God's blessings on you in your work. Call me anytime I can help you. Thank you so much, Dr. Snow.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll be back in just a minute with my commentary about a journey I took with my grandson this week. I'll be back in just a minute. Samuel Wyatt Curson is my grandson. He's 12 years old, lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. For this month of June, he's in my care, and I couldn't be happier. Together, we decided to spend as much of the month as we could exploring North Carolina. I don't know too much about North Carolina myself. We started off in the west, traveling the Blue Ridge Parkway, picnicking on Mount Pisgah, sliding down that well-named Sliding Rock. What an adventure that was. Earlier, we had explored the grounds of the Carl Sandburg Farm, just not far from here. Who knew Carl Sandburg had moved to North Carolina? And then up to Jump Off Rock in Hendersonville. At the end of the month, we hope to travel up the East Coast, visit the battleship, the USS North Carolina, and the Outer Banks. Sam tells me that somewhere between them on the Pamlico Sound is the small town of Bath, North Carolina. He knows about it because that's where the notorious pirate Blackbeard hid his treasure. We're going to go take a look. But this week, our destination was Greensboro. Quote, I wonder why people come to Greensboro, end quote, a longtime friend of mine and a resident of that town said to me when I told him we were coming. But obviously, he had forgotten about Guilford Courthouse National Military Park, commemorating the 1781 battle between the Revolutionary forces under the command of Nathaniel Greene and the British regulars led by none other than Charles Cornwallis, who later surrendered at Yorktown. When it was all over, that battle at Guilford, the British controlled the field, but had to retreat due to the high number of casualties. And his retreat led him to Yorktown and the end of the war. So in some sense, the battle was the beginning of the end. It's a beautiful park, full of monuments and walking trails and thick woods. A perfect place for a boy and his grandfather to toss the football and dream of a little football glory or just making the junior high team this fall. Close by is the Greensboro Science Center, and Sam tagged that as of first importance in our excursion to the city. Equal in significance to this site of freedom struggle, that battlefield, is another noteworthy place, downtown on Elm Street, at the once bustling store with the once famous name F.W. Woolworth. Founded in 1879 in New York City, Woolworth set the pattern for a century of five and dime stores that populated every city and town in America. But after decades of struggle, the chain closed those stores and opened others, including the now popular Foot Locker. Who knew? But that Woolworth store on M Street in Greensboro, North Carolina is now a museum because in the winter of 1961, 4 college freshmen from the nearby North Carolina A&T took their place in history as they selected a seat at the lunch counters that ran along the north and west sides of the public dining room, the segregated public dining room. It was the days of Jim Crow in Greensboro. Black people were welcome to work behind the counter and shop throughout the store, which they did. But they were not allowed to sit with the white folk and order coffee or lunch or dessert. The sit-in on February 1, 1961 drew the attention of local people. A photographer from the local newspaper enticed those 4 students, all of them nicely dressed and well-behaved, to pose for pictures on the front sidewalk at the close of the day. The photograph was printed around the country and generated national attention. Thus began the famous lunch counter sit-in that lasted from February to July. It sparked a national movement that involved eventually more than 70,000 lunch counter demonstrators. It prompted Woolworths to change their food service policy across the South. It helped launch the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That famous dining hall is intact, complete with placards advertising turkey dinners for 65 cents or coffee and tea for 15 cents. The 2 perpendicular rows of swivel lunch counter seats stand motionless. Sam and I were the only people in the exhibit that day. There was no sound. Elsewhere in this International Civil Rights Center and Museum, we looked at larger-than-life images of people, some famous, some forgotten. On one wall, the whole wall, full of the arrest records, small 3x5 cards, I found the picture the name and address of one person named John Moody of Washington, D.C. He was born in 1931. Maybe he's still alive. I hope we're related. We sat and watched most of a long video in which the curators introduced the rooms of the museum, each dedicated to a specific sphere: commerce, transportation, education, religion, law. Jim Crow was an ugly and ungodly reality in America. Its negative impact lingers today. I was 11 years old when the sit-in galvanized the energies of a nation. Sam is now 12, listening intently, looking closely, learning deeply, asking the questions that prove he will be a more discerning person than I was at his age, perhaps at any age. I thank God for that. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse. I'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody, coming to you over Rejoice Radio in the Golden Isles of Georgia and through the television network of the St. Stephen's Baptist Church of Louisville, Kentucky. You can visit our website at themeetinghouse.net. There you will have this commentary and all the commentaries. Gee, there must be more than 100. I'm getting ready to publish another book. The first book of my commentaries, which I published while I was on the faculty of Georgetown College, On the Other Side of Oddville. That's still available if you'd like to buy one. You can read all the book reviews. The book I picked up in town in Greensboro, The Warmth of Other Suns, by Isabel Wilkerson. I read her sequel to this entitled Cast, and my commentary or my review of that book is on the website at themeetinghouse.net, and I'll have a review of this book. Last week, I published a review of a book about John Prine. That doesn't surprise you. I'm trying to write an article, do my own research, The Gospel and John Prine. I'm working on that. If you have any leads, give me a shout. You could join the Circle of 70 here at the Meetinghouse. These are people who believe in what we're doing. And what we're doing is to have civil, sane, intelligent conversation about religion and American life. You know, a lot of religion in America is neither civil nor sane. Some of it's downright crazy. Some of it leads to violence and anger and hostility and division. But if you believe in what we're doing here in the Meetinghouse, you'd like to make a contribution to our work, we're looking for 70 donors. We now have 28. You can be one of the 70. I chose 70, of course, because I started it last year when I turned 70. I'm going to leave it at that. You can go to the Meetinghouse at themeetinghouse.net/support. Find out how you can send a check or make a donation online. A few weeks ago, I started Dr. Moody's Bible class. There are about 26 people from 10 states who join on each Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's 5 o'clock out on the West Coast in Eugene, Oregon. You can register for that class on the website. It's free and open to anybody. Most of the people who attend, interestingly enough, are people who used to go to church, but have dropped by the wayside. Some of them with a great deal of anger and some bitter stories to tell. Thank you for listening today, coming to you over rejoice975.com and ssclive.tv through Facebook Live and YouTube. Thanks to my engineer, Everett Armstrong, down in our studios in the Golden Isles of Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, where I have a home. Thanks to Alex Mattingly in the studio in Louisville, Kentucky. These are both great partners of mine. I hold them in high regard. Thanks all of you for listening today. You can follow me on Twitter at Dwight A. Moody. Until next week, my guest is Stephanie Spellers. She's the canon to the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, and she's written a book we're going to talk about. She'll be in New York City. Be safe, do justice, get a shot, get a vaccine, take off your mask and smile, drink some coffee, order some coffee from perfectocoffeeinc.com. Be kind to somebody in a special way. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meeting House. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.